The church was packed that Sunday morning. Families filled the pews, their voices blending in harmony as they sang hymns. The atmosphere was peaceful until Pastor Elijah Matthews walked onto the pulpit with a cold expression. He wasn't dressed in his usual suit. Instead, he wore a simple black shirt, his hands gripping a small remote control. "Brothers and sisters," his voice boomed through the speakers, "today we uncover the truth." The congregation murmured, confused. They had never seen their pastor like this before. Some of the elders glanced at each other, sensing something was wrong. Then, without another word, Pastor Matthews pressed the button on the remote. The church's projector flickered to life. At first, the screen was black. Then the image became clear. Gasps and horrified whispers spread like wildfire as the congregation realized what they were watching. There on the screen was the pastor's wife, Vanessa Matthews, in bed with another man, John Carter, a respected deacon of the church. The video showed them tangled together in passion, their betrayal undeniable. Women covered their mouths in shock. Men shook their heads in disbelief. Sister Carter, John's wife, let out a strangled cry before fainting. The church descended into chaos. Some people rushed out, unable to bear the sight, while others stayed frozen in their seats. Pastor Matthews turned to his wife, who sat in the front row, her face drained of color. "Care to explain, Vanessa?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. Vanessa looked at him, her eyes filled with terror. She tried to stand, but her legs failed her. "Elijah, please," she whispered. John Carter, red-faced and shaking, stood up. "You're a sick man," he spat. "You had no right to—" Pastor Matthews cut him off with a sharp laugh. "No right. You had no right to crawl into my wife's bed." The tension in the church was suffocating. Vanessa started crying, but it was too late. The damage was done. The story had started long before this public humiliation. Pastor Matthews and Vanessa had been married for 12 years, but things had changed over time. Their once loving marriage had grown cold. They had tried counseling, prayer, and even an agreement that many in their congregation would never approve of, an open marriage. At first, it was just an idea, something whispered between them in moments of frustration. Then it became real. They set rules: no attachments, full honesty, and no affairs within the church. But rules were meant to be broken. Vanessa had met John Carter under the most innocent circumstances. He and his wife, Linda, had been members of the church for years. Their families were close. They had dinner together, traveled for church retreats, and even prayed together. But somewhere along the line, friendship turned into something more. It started with secret glances, then late-night messages. A touch here, a stolen kiss there. Before they knew it, they were meeting in hotel rooms, escaping into a world where guilt didn't exist, until the pastor found out. Pastor Matthews had suspected for weeks. Vanessa had been distant. She smiled less. She spent more time outside the house. And worst of all, she stopped desiring him. He wasn't a fool. He knew what that meant. So he followed her. He watched her patterns. And then one night, he saw her slip into a hotel room with John Carter. His heart broke. But in that moment, his pain was replaced by something darker: revenge. Instead of confronting her, he set a trap. He hired a private investigator, obtained footage, and carefully planned his next move. He wanted them to suffer just as he had suffered. And now in front of the entire congregation, his plan had come to life. But he hadn't anticipated what would happen next. That night, long after the chaos in the church had settled, Vanessa Matthews was found dead. Her body was discovered in the couple's bedroom, sprawled across the bed, a deep wound on her throat. Blood soaked the white sheets. The house was eerily quiet. No signs of struggle, no forced entry. The police arrived quickly. Pastor Matthews stood in the living room, his hands covered in blood. His eyes were hollow. The lead detective, Mark Calloway, studied him carefully. "Pastor, you need to come with us." The pastor barely reacted. He simply nodded, whispering, "I just wanted justice." But justice had turned into something far worse. As the officers cuffed him and led him away, Detective Calloway looked around the crime scene. Something felt off. This wasn't just a crime of passion. This was something deeper. And as the investigation unfolded, the truth would prove to be more twisted than anyone could have imagined. Detective Mark Calloway had seen plenty of crime scenes in his 20 years on the force, but this one had a strange energy. The Matthews bedroom was cold, not from the air conditioning, but from the eerie silence that filled it. The scent of blood was thick in the air, mixed with the faint smell of vanilla, probably from one of Vanessa's perfumes. Vanessa Matthews lay on the king-size bed, her silk nightgown soaked in blood. A single deep wound across her throat had ended her life. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, no broken furniture. The only thing that seemed out of place was the bloodied knife resting on the nightstand. Detective Calloway stood in the doorway, scanning the room. His partner, Officer Jenna Alvarez, a sharp and methodical investigator, took notes beside him. "No forced entry," she said, flicking through her notepad. "No signs of a struggle. The husband was home when it happened. He didn't even call 911. His neighbor did after hearing him screaming." Calloway exhaled. He turned to where Pastor Elijah Matthews sat in the living room, still in his blood-stained clothes. He was silent, his eyes staring at the floor. Jenna crossed her arms. "This doesn't look like a break-in gone wrong." "No," Calloway agreed. "This looks personal." An hour later, Calloway and Jenna sat across from Pastor Matthews in the interrogation room. The pastor's hands were cuffed, but he didn't seem to care. He was lost in thought, his fingers twitching against the cold metal of the table. "Pastor," Calloway began, his voice steady, "walk us through what happened last night." Matthews took a deep breath. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. "I came home around 10. Vanessa was already in bed. I went to my study, poured myself a drink, and sat there for a while. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing after what happened in church." Calloway nodded. "Understandable. Keep going." "Around midnight, I finally decided to go to bed. When I walked in, she was already dead." Jenna's pen scratched against her notepad. "So you're saying you didn't hear anything? No intruder? No struggle?" Matthews shook his head. "Nothing. It was quiet. Too quiet." Calloway leaned forward. "Pastor, I need you to be honest with me. Did you kill your wife?" Matthews lifted his eyes. They were filled with grief and something else. Something darker. Number silence filled the room. Calloway didn't believe in coincidences. A man humiliates his wife in public, and hours later, she turns up dead? It didn't sit right, but something about Matthew's reaction made him hesitate. He had seen guilty men before. This one seemed different. Back at the crime scene, forensic specialists worked under bright lights. A technician approached Calloway with an evidence bag. Inside was a small USB drive found in Vanessa's jewelry box. "We're analyzing the contents now," the technician said, "but it looks like she was hiding something." Calloway's gut tightened. Secrets. This case was full of them. He turned to Jenna. "Let's pay John Carter a visit." John Carter's house was in a quiet suburb, a short drive from the church. When Calloway and Jenna knocked on the door, a tired-looking woman answered. Linda Carter, John's wife. Her eyes were swollen, probably from crying. "Detectives," she said, her voice weak. "I assume you're here about Vanessa." "Yes, ma'am," Calloway replied. "Is your husband home?" She nodded slowly and stepped aside. John Carter sat in the living room, looking just as wrecked as Linda. His hands were clasped together, his leg bouncing nervously. "Mr. Carter," Calloway started, "where were you last night?" John swallowed. "Home, with my wife." Linda nodded weakly. "He was with me all night." Calloway studied them. Linda's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "Mr. Carter," Jenna cut in, "do you have any idea who might have wanted Vanessa dead?" John hesitated. His face twitched, as if he was holding something back. Then he sighed. "I don't know, but I got a message from her earlier that night." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his messages before handing it to Calloway. "Vanessa, we need to talk. It's important. Meet me tomorrow. I found something that changes everything." Calloway exchanged a glance with Jenna. What did she mean by that? John shook his head. "I don't know, but I think she found something she wasn't supposed to." Back at the station, Calloway sat at his desk as a forensic analyst plugged the USB drive into a computer. Files popped up, documents, emails, and a single video file. "Let's see what's inside," the analyst muttered. The video played. It wasn't another affair video. It was footage from a hidden camera inside the church office. In the dimly lit room, a shadowy figure was seen rifling through a filing cabinet. After a few moments, they pulled out an envelope and left. Calloway frowned. "Pause it." The analyst zoomed in. The figure turned slightly before leaving. It wasn't Vanessa. It wasn't John Carter. It was someone else entirely. Calloway's stomach turned as he recognized the face. This case was bigger than an affair, bigger than revenge, and if they didn't move fast, more blood would spill. Detective Calloway stared at the paused footage on the screen. The face in the video was familiar, but not in the way he had expected. It was Elder Charles Whitman, a longtime church member and trusted advisor. Whitman was one of the men who had stood by Pastor Matthews after the scandal broke. He had been vocal about his support, condemning Vanessa and John Carter for their betrayal. But now he was caught sneaking into the church office at night, taking something from the filing cabinet. Calloway's mind raced. What had Vanessa found? And why was Whitman involved? Jenna Alvarez, his partner, let out a low whistle. "Looks like we've got ourselves a new angle." Calloway nodded. "We need to talk to Elder Whitman." Now, tracking down Elder Whitman wasn't as easy as they expected. His phone was off, and when they visited his house, his wife, Margaret, answered the door with puffy eyes. "He's not here," she said, sniffling. Calloway studied her carefully. "Do you know where he went?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "He left late last night, said he needed to clear his head." "Did he seem nervous?" Jenna asked. Margaret swallowed hard. "Yes, very." Calloway and Jenna exchanged glances. This wasn't looking good. "Mrs. Whitman, was your husband close to Vanessa Matthews?" Her face tensed. "Not exactly. He respected her, but there was something about her he didn't trust." Calloway pulled out his phone and showed her the screenshot from the security footage. "Do you know why he was in the church office?" Margaret's eyes widened. "No, I don't understand." Neither did they. But one thing was clear. Elder Whitman was hiding something. Back at the station, the forensic team analyzed the documents found on the USB drive. They weren't love letters or secret confessions. They were financial records, bank statements, donation reports, and expense sheets from the church. And something was very wrong. Jenna leaned over the documents, frowning. "There are major inconsistencies here. Large amounts of money were withdrawn from the church's account, thousands of dollars every few months, but there's no record of where it went." Calloway exhaled. "Someone's been stealing from the church, and Vanessa found out," Jenna finished. Calloway nodded. "And that got her killed." They returned to the interrogation room, where Pastor Matthews still sat, looking drained. "Pastor," Calloway started, dropping the financial statements in front of him, "did you know about this?" Matthews looked down at the papers, his brow furrowing. "What is this?" "Your church's financial records," Jenna said. "Someone's been stealing money. A lot of it." Matthews shook his head. "That's not possible. I oversee all the finances." "Apparently not all of them," Calloway said. "Do you recognize this name?" He pointed to a forged signature on one of the documents. Matthews' eyes widened. "That's Elder Whitman's signature." The pieces were coming together. Elder Whitman had been embezzling church funds. Vanessa, after being caught in her own scandal, must have been trying to redeem herself. Perhaps she wanted to expose the corruption. She had reached out to John Carter, possibly because she thought he would help. She had planned to reveal everything the next day, but she never got the chance. Someone had silenced her. And now that someone was missing. A breakthrough came when Whitman's car was spotted at a motel on the outskirts of town. Calloway and Jenna rushed to the location, sirens blaring. The motel clerk, a scrawny young man, pointed them to room 14. "He checked in late last night, hasn't left since." Calloway and Jenna exchanged looks before drawing their weapons. They moved cautiously, knocking on the door. "Elder Whitman, this is the police. Open up." Silence. Calloway nodded at Jenna, and she kicked the door open. Inside, Elder Whitman sat on the edge of the bed, a gun in his hand. His eyes were red, his face pale. "I didn't mean to kill her," he whispered. Detective Calloway and Jenna stood in the doorway of the motel room, their guns drawn. Elder Charles Whitman sat on the edge of the bed, gripping a pistol with shaking hands. His eyes were red, his breathing shallow. "I didn't mean to kill her," he whispered, staring at the gun as if it were a foreign object. Calloway took a slow step forward, keeping his voice calm. "Then put the gun down, Charles. Let's talk." Whitman's fingers tightened around the grip. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. She wasn't supposed to know." Jenna inched forward. "Know what, Charles? That you were stealing from the church?" Whitman let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You think it's that simple? You have no idea what you're dealing with." Calloway felt his stomach tighten. "Then help us understand." Whitman hesitated, his lips trembled. Then slowly, he lowered the gun onto the bed. Jenna moved quickly, grabbing it and securing it. "You made the right choice." Calloway sat across from him. "Start from the beginning, Charles. Tell us everything." Whitman exhaled deeply, rubbing his face. "The money. Yes, I was taking it. But I wasn't the only one." Calloway and Jenna exchanged glances. The church was in financial trouble. We were losing members, donations were down, and the expenses kept piling up. I tried to fix it. God knows I did. But then, I got involved with the wrong people. "Who?" Jenna pressed. Whitman hesitated. "Some local investors. They promised to help the church in exchange for a cut of the donations." Calloway's jaw clenched. "You were laundering money?" Whitman nodded. "I didn't see it that way at first. I thought I was saving the church. But the deeper I got, the harder it became to stop. And then, Vanessa found out." Whitman's eyes filled with guilt. "She confronted me 2 nights ago. Said she had proof, documents, bank statements. I don't know how she got them, but she told me she was going to expose everything at Sunday service." "And you couldn't let that happen," Calloway said. Whitman shook his head. "I panicked. I begged her not to say anything. I told her it would destroy the church, but she didn't care. She said the truth had to come out." He swallowed hard. "I didn't go there to kill her. I just wanted to scare her, make her understand what was at stake. But when I got to the house, she was already asleep." Jenna's brow furrowed. "So you broke in?" "Yes, I took my key, one I had from when I used to do maintenance for them. I went inside intending to take the documents and leave. But then, she woke up." Whitman's hands trembled. "She screamed. She reached for her phone, probably to call the police. I grabbed her, tried to make her stop. She fought back. And then," his voice broke. Calloway finished for him. "You slit her throat." Tears spilled down Whitman's face. "I didn't mean to. It just happened so fast." Jenna stared at him coldly. "And then you wiped the knife and staged the scene to make it look like Pastor Matthews did it." Whitman nodded, defeated. "I knew no one would believe him after what happened at church. It was easy. Too easy." Calloway leaned back, studying Whitman. Something still wasn't right. "If you killed Vanessa, why run now?" Whitman hesitated. "Because I think they're coming for me next." "Who?" Jenna demanded. Whitman swallowed hard. "The people I worked with, the ones who handled the money, they know I've been caught, and they don't leave loose ends." Calloway exchanged a glance with Jenna. This wasn't just about murder anymore. There were bigger players involved, and if Whitman was right, they weren't done spilling blood. Detective Calloway and Jenna sat in the dimly lit interrogation room, staring at Elder Charles Whitman. His confession had given them clarity on Vanessa Matthews' murder, but it had also opened a door to something much more sinister. "Who are they, Charles?" Calloway asked, his voice firm. "Who's behind the money laundering?" Whitman swallowed hard. "It's bigger than you think. These aren't just businessmen. They're powerful men, politicians, community leaders, even law enforcement. They use churches like ours to clean their dirty money. I thought I could keep up, but when Vanessa found out, they told me to handle it." Jenna narrowed her eyes. "So you're saying you didn't act alone?" Whitman shook his head. "I got the order, but if I hadn't done it, someone else would have. And now that I'm talking to you, they know I'm a liability." He leaned forward, his voice shaking. "They're coming for me next." Calloway knew this meant they were dealing with organized crime. If powerful figures were involved, Their investigation was far from over. But there was a bigger problem. If Whitman was right, his life was now in immediate danger. Later that night, Whitman was placed in a holding cell for his safety. The plan was to move him to a secure location the next morning. But at 3:47 a.m., an officer found him slumped over on his cot, lifeless. A single injection mark on his neck told the story. Someone had gotten to him. Calloway and Jenna arrived at the station just as paramedics confirmed the time of death. The air was thick with tension. Jenna clenched her jaw. Someone walked into a police station and assassinated him. That tells you how deep this goes. Calloway ran a hand through his hair. We were too late. He looked at the body bag being wheeled away. And now, whoever's behind this knows we're getting close. With Whitman gone, their only lead was the financial records Vanessa had uncovered. Jenna stayed at the precinct, combing through them again while Calloway paid a visit to someone he hadn't spoken to since the start of the case. Pastor Matthews. The man sat in his cell, his once proud presence now reduced to exhaustion. But when Calloway placed the financial records in front of him, his expression changed. I don't recognize these, Matthews admitted. I handled the church's finances, but not all of them. Some of this I've never seen before. Who else had access? Matthews hesitated. Only a few people. Myself, Elder Whitman, and Deacon Robert Hayes. Calloway's eyes sharpened. Hayes? Matthews nodded. He handled most of the external donations. Why? Because Robert Hayes' name was all over those records. Back at the precinct, Jenna had uncovered something damning. We traced the stolen church funds to several offshore accounts, she told Calloway. And guess whose name is tied to all of them? Robert Hayes, Jenna nodded. He's been funneling church money into fake charities and shell corporations for years. And I found something else. Large cash deposits made right after Vanessa's murder. Someone was paid to kill her. Calloway's face hardened. It wasn't Whitman. He was just a pawn. Jenna grabbed her coat. Then let's go find the real mastermind. It was early Sunday morning. The church was already filling up for service when Calloway and Jenna arrived. They walked straight to the front row where Deacon Robert Hayes sat, shaking hands and smiling like a man without a care in the world. Calloway leaned down beside him. We need to talk, Deacon. Hayes looked up, his smile faltering. Detectives? What's this about? Vanessa Matthews, and how you had her killed. Hayes's face barely changed, but his fingers tightened around the Bible in his lap. I have no idea what you're talking about. Jenna slid a file onto the pew beside him. We have evidence. The stolen funds, the offshore accounts, the payout after Vanessa's death. You're done, Hayes. For a moment, Hayes didn't speak. Then he exhaled, shaking his head. You don't understand, detectives. I was just doing God's work. Calloway clenched his jaw. By laundering money? Hayes finally looked at them, his expression eerily calm. By protecting this church from collapse. Do you think faith alone pays the bills? People need security, and the people I worked with provided it. Vanessa, she didn't get that. She wanted to tear everything down. Jenna's voice was sharp. So you had her killed? Hayes shrugged. She gave me no choice. It was a cold, calculated admission. Calloway grabbed his cuffs. Well, now you have no choice either. You're under arrest. As Hayes was led away, he chuckled. You think this ends with me? He turned to Calloway. You have no idea what's coming, detective. And for the first time in a long while, Calloway felt a chill down his spine. Detective Calloway sat in the precinct's briefing room, staring at the files spread out before him. Jenna paced the floor, her arms crossed tightly. The arrest of Deacon Robert Hayes had been a victory, but they both knew the battle was far from over. He wasn't lying, Jenna said, breaking the tense silence. There's more to this. Calloway nodded. We just took down a key player in a bigger operation, and whoever's at the top won't take this lightly. They had already begun feeling the pressure. An hour after Hayes' arrest, the district attorney's office received an anonymous tip questioning Calloway's integrity. That same night, Jenna's apartment was broken into, her laptop missing, files destroyed. This was a message, a warning. Jenna exhaled. We need to move fast. Who was Hayes working for? Calloway tapped his fingers against the table, then pulled out a name from the church's financial records. Councilman Gerald Price. a powerful politician, a man with deep connections to both the city and the church, and, as it seemed, a man with secrets worth killing for. With little time to waste, Calloway and Jenna decided to confront Price directly. They arrived at his luxurious estate on the outskirts of town, where security was tighter than at a government facility. A butler led them into a grand office, where Councilman Price sat behind a mahogany desk. He was an older man, polished and refined, with sharp eyes that took them in with quiet amusement. "Detectives," he greeted smoothly, gesturing for them to sit. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Calloway didn't bother with pleasantries. "Robert Hayes has been arrested for Vanessa Matthews' murder." Price nodded, his face impassive. "Yes, tragic. The church will never recover from such a scandal." Jenna leaned forward. "Cut the act. We know you were pulling the strings. Hayes was your puppet." Price chuckled softly. "Detective, do you have any idea who you're accusing? Do you think you can walk in here, throw around baseless accusations, and walk out unscathed?" Calloway narrowed his eyes. "Are you threatening us?" Price smiled, steepling his fingers. "I don't need to threaten anyone. I simply want you to understand that there are levels to power in this city, and you're playing in a league you don't belong to." Jenna clenched her fists. "Vanessa found out you were laundering money through the church. She threatened to expose you, so you had her killed. Hayes pulled the trigger, but you gave the order." Price's smile remained, but his eyes darkened. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Calloway leaned in. "We have a warrant coming for your financial records. It's only a matter of time before we tie you directly to this." Price chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, Detective Calloway, you're a good man. But good men don't last long in my world." The weight of the words hung in the air. Jenna stood. "We'll see about that." As they left, Calloway couldn't shake the feeling that they had just made themselves targets. By the time they returned to the precinct, things had already taken a turn. Hayes had been found dead in his holding cell. "Suicide," they said. Jenna slammed her fist on the desk. "This is bullshit." They silenced him. Calloway exhaled sharply. "Price is cleaning house." Just then, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Check your email. The truth is in the files." He and Jenna exchanged glances before rushing to his computer. When he opened his inbox, a single attachment was waiting. He clicked it, and what he saw made his blood run cold. A series of audio recordings, Price speaking with Hayes, discussing payments, approving the hit on Vanessa Matthews. Clear, undeniable evidence. Jenna's eyes widened. "This is it. This is the proof we need." But Calloway frowned. "Who sent this?" Before Jenna could respond, another message appeared. "You're running out of time. They're coming." And then, the precinct lights went out. The precinct plunged into darkness. The hum of electricity faded, leaving an eerie silence. Calloway's instincts kicked in immediately. "Jenna, get down!" Gunfire erupted. Bullets shattered glass, ricocheting off metal cabinets. Officers shouted, scrambling for cover. "Move!" Calloway grabbed Jenna's arm, dragging her toward the back exit. They had seconds before whoever cut the power got to them. Jenna fumbled for her gun. "They're here to kill us." Calloway's jaw tightened. And whoever sent that message knew it was coming. They reached the alley just as an unmarked black SUV skidded to a stop. A man leaned out, dressed in tactical gear, rifle aimed directly at them. Calloway fired first. One shot to the shoulder. The man grunted, dropping his weapon. Jenna grabbed the wheel of a nearby police cruiser. "Get in!" Tires screeched as they sped off into the night. 15 minutes later, they arrived at an old warehouse on the city's outskirts, an abandoned police safe house Calloway had used once before. Jenna's hands shook as she reloaded her gun. "They took out Hayes, tried to kill us. Price isn't just a corrupt politician, he's a damn crime lord." Calloway checked his phone. The mysterious sender had sent another message. "There's a file, a ledger. It proves everything. Find it before they do." He cursed under his breath. They must be talking about the missing church records. Jenna looked up. Where would Price keep something like that? Calloway's mind raced. Price wouldn't store something so incriminating in his office. It had to be somewhere he controlled completely. Then it hit him. The church. St. Matthew's Church stood quiet in the dead of night. Calloway and Jenna crept through the back entrance, weapons drawn. The air smelled of old wood and candle wax. Jenna whispered, "If this place is Price's money hub, he's got security." They moved cautiously toward the pastor's office. Calloway reached for the door, locked. Jenna smirked, pulling out a hairpin. "Give me 10 seconds." The lock clicked open. Inside, Calloway yanked open drawers, searching for anything that could tie Price to the church's financial crimes. Then behind a false panel in the bookshelf, bingo, a black ledger bound in leather. Jenna flipped through the pages. "This is it. Offshore accounts, wire transfers, payments to hitmen." She froze. "Wait, look at this." Calloway leaned over. A series of payments, each labeled CP. His blood went cold. Councilman Price, but then another name, one that made his stomach drop. S. Calloway. Jenna stepped back. "Calloway, why is your name in here?" He stared at the page, mind spinning. His father's name was Samuel Calloway, but he had been dead for over 20 years. Jenna's eyes darkened. "Who is S. Calloway?" Before he could answer, a voice behind them. Well, I was wondering when you'd figure it out." They spun around. Councilman Gerald Price stood in the doorway. Behind him, a man Calloway never thought he'd see again. Samuel Calloway, his father, very much alive. Calloway's world tilted. "Dad!" The older man smirked. "Did you miss me, son?" Jenna raised her gun. "The hell is this?" Price chuckled. "Oh, Detective Calloway, you never wondered why you were allowed to get this far? Why you weren't killed the moment you got too close?" Calloway's hands clenched into fists. "You were supposed to be dead." Samuel sighed. "That's what I wanted you to believe. It made things easier." Calloway's heart pounded. "You've been working with Price?" His father gave him a pitying look. "No, son. I'm the one who built all this. Price is just the face. I taught him everything he knows." Calloway felt sick. "You faked your death?" Samuel shrugged. "It was necessary. You don't run an empire like this by being sentimental." Jenna's grip tightened on her gun. "You had Vanessa Matthews killed." Samuel sighed. "She was a loose end." Calloway's rage boiled over. "You bastard!" Price smirked. "Detectives, I'd love to continue this conversation, but unfortunately, you won't be leaving here alive." Men stepped out of the shadows, guns aimed at them. Calloway's mind raced. No way out. They were cornered. Jenna whispered, "Got a plan?" Calloway glanced at the stained glass window behind them. "Yeah, run." Calloway fired first, hitting the closest guard. Jenna kicked over a desk, using it as cover. Price and Samuel ducked behind the pulpit. Calloway and Jenna exchanged a look. They only had one shot at this. Jenna counted down. 3, 2, 1. They ran. Bullets tore through the wooden pews as they dove through the stained glass window. Shards of colored glass rained down as they hit the ground outside. Calloway groaned, pain shooting through his arm. "That was a terrible plan." Jenna gasped for breath. "But we're alive." They scrambled into their car, tires screeching as they sped off. The next morning, Calloway handed the ledger to the FBI. Within hours, Price was arrested at his home. But Samuel Calloway? Gone. Jenna sat on the precinct steps, shaking her head. "Your father played us," Calloway exhaled. "This isn't over. I'm going to find him." Jenna nodded. "And when you do?" Calloway stared at the sunrise. "I'll finish what he started."